online conversations many-wise, previous to the Youth Partnership Symposium on the Future of Young People's Political Participation. This is our third online conversation after What Do I Care For? On social values, and Our House is on Fire, on the current challenges around the globe and the role of youth political participation to solve them. You can already check both in the symposium website, as well as the recording of this one in the following days. So many-wise. We thought about these online conversations both as a preparation for our symposium on youth political participation, and also to give the opportunity to explore these relevant topics to more people who couldn't join the event. Political participation seems to be a very relevant topic today for many reasons and with many forms. Through these online conversations, we are tackling some of them. My name is Ramon Martinez. I'm part of the facilitators team of the symposium. In the background, we have the technical support of Raimona Zaragauskas, and we are happy to introduce this online conversation. Before introducing today's online conversation, a short description of the format. We will start with our guest contribution, time during which you can ask questions that we will be answering during the process. And then we will continue with a conversation altogether. This edition of many-wise is called Education for Social Change, the Political Dimension of Youth Work. During this time together, we will have a look at different views on democracy and politics, explore what all of this has to do with youth work, and why youth work is political. For this, we have with us Tim Scholz. Tim works as the head of education department of the Youth Education Centre Kurt Loewenstein in the suburbs of Berlin since 2009. He is also visiting lecturer at Potsdam University and past president of the International Falcon Movement. In his work with the school classes, international groups, youth workers, and other stakeholders, he focuses, among other topics, on human rights education, non-discrimination, and strategies against right-wing extremism and populism. In these many why conversations, we challenge our speakers to bring an object to share with the participants and to start the conversation. Tim is bringing us a complete building, the education center where they work, to introduce why youth work is political. Welcome, Tim.
Yeah, thank you very much for introducing myself. As I was introduced, my name is Tim. I work in the Education Centre Kurt Loewenstein, and I would really like to thank the Youth Partnership for inviting me today as a panelist to give you an input. Yes, I was already introduced myself, so therefore, a long time ago, I studied political science, history, and European cultural sciences, and now I'm working since 2007 in the Education Centre Kurt Loewenstein, which I will shortly introduce. And now I would like to start my presentation. Okay, so now I have to. I guess. Now you all should see my PowerPoint, right? Ramon, can you see my PowerPoint now?
Not yet, not yet.
Not yet. Why not?
Maybe the screen is not shared.
Yes, make sure you click on share and then choose PowerPoint window.
So is it now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Try to click on the share button.
Yeah, I did.
Yes, it's starting.
Now it's starting. Okay, cool. So now you should see it, right?
Yes.
Okay, as I was invited to speak about the topic of education for social change and to introduce a bit what we understand in our education center as a political dimension of youth work. What I would like to address here, I would like briefly to introduce our education center, what it's all about and whom we are reaching out to and what is our background, just to give you a bit like a picture in which framework I'm addressing you. Then I would like to introduce the different dimension of democracy, so a bit of political sciences theory, so what is politics, and so on. What is policy? What is polity? What's all this? And then I would like to connect the question of a political science approach. What has it to do with youth work? So what is the political dimension of youth work? Which then I would like to explore with you the political dimension of youth work, as I said before, and giving you an insight what I understand, or we in our education center understand as a political dimension of youth work. And in the end, I would like to come back to your questions and hopefully also able to answer them. I mean, you could also raise questions in between already. If there's something for clarification, I might ask in between for points of clarification, but afterwards I really would like to have you an interesting debate and coming back to your questions. Okay, our education center, Kurt Loewenstein, is based in the suburbs of Berlin, as Ramon already introduced. It's an old building which was built a decade ago, and we're using it for 20 years now for non-formal education. So you see a bit of a bird view from this and how it looks in our seminars. So we are an NGO, and we are run by a youth organization, which is the Socialist Youth of Germany, Die Falken, which has its long roots in the labor movement in Germany. And we're having 120 beds in total in our house. And in our education department, we are 5 paid education officers who are in charge of different formats of seminars. And we have a big pool of freelancers with whom we are working. In total, we are doing about 80 seminars a year in our center. And we're also renting out to other groups, which means we have about 30,000 overnight stays where groups are staying in our house, participants 30,000 nights a year, and about 2/3 of them we are running our own activities in our center. We are a non-formal education center. I saw from some of you who are working as teachers, so we are mainly working in the field of non-formal education in cooperation with school classes, which I come later on, and this huge field of education for democratic citizenship and human rights education. So to whom we are reaching out, mainly we're working with kids and youngsters from less privileged neighborhoods in the framework of cooperation with school classes. What mean kids and youngsters? We are mainly starting in the age of 8 years, and then we are coming up to 27, which is something like the upper age limit of our target group. As I said before, we are mainly working in cooperation with school classes, which means it's more like a class trip, which means a class is coming with their teachers to our center, choosing before topics they would like to address. And then we are running a week seminar with them, or 4 or 5 days, but mainly 5 days. They're coming to our center and having a non-formal education training on any topics they might be interested in. We're also doing international seminars and encounters. We have a network of partner organizations through all over Europe and Israel and Palestine. They're coming there, which means they are under one is education seminars, but we're also doing a lot of encountering, like meeting people from other countries, mainly in a multilateral framework. And what we're doing as well is seminars and training for multipliers, which means youth workers, teachers, people active in the field of non-formal education, training for them. This is what we're mainly doing. Okay. So far, maybe about the background of our education center. And what I would like to start with is going a bit into theory. So what are different dimensions of democracy? The first understanding of democracy is democracy as a form of rule. I would say this is a very classical approach to political sciences, and maybe what is taught in school. It's very much focusing on the state, its functioning, and its tasks, the way to govern, which means very much in school, if you remind, you learn how people elect the parliament, and the parliament elects the government, and the government is executing. And then we also have the juridical, so executive, legislative, and judicative questions are mainly understood as democracy as form of rule. So very traditional understanding what is democracy. Then the second dimension, what we very much discuss, is democracy as a form of society, so how society is organized. And then it's a bit wider understanding of democracy, and civil society is a strong factor for democracy as a form of society. like involvement of non-governmental organization, autonomy, independent media, possibilities for active citizenship. So mainly what we today understand when we discuss on the European level, what democracy is understood. This is a bit wider already understanding of democracy, which leads me to the third term, how we very much understand, or what I understand democracy is a way of life. So we have a strong democratic culture, democracy as a social idea. There's a base for democratic political engagement and participation. Diversity is respected, solidarity, and self-organization. So it's more like a cultural understanding. How do we understand democracy? So democracy is not something very abstract, which happens in the parliament, but it has a very wide understanding what is political. And this is what we understand very much in our center, or the discourses I'm active in, as democracy in a wide understanding as a way of life. This is not very new. It's a very old discussion. When you look to John Dewey, an American philosopher and educational practitioner, a decade ago, he already understood in his writings democracy as a way of lifestyle. And this was then after the Second World War, after the liberation from fascism in Germany, brought by the Western allies to Germany in the field of re-education, when the old Nazis should be educated into Democrats. And then it was very much used already in the 40s and in the 50s in Germany to re-educate Germans as Democrats. And then this John Dewey idea of democracy as a lifestyle, which means it has a lot to do with experience and stuff like this, which I come later on. So this is not a new idea, it's a very old idea, but therefore I would like to highlight in my later input very much to understand democracy as a way of life, because I think this is quite important when it comes to youth participation. Okay, are there any questions so far on these different understandings of democracy? So they're not excluding each other, it's more like how to understand democracy in a broader understanding.
It seems there are no questions yet.
Okay.
People will start warming up.
Okay. If not, then we continue. Okay, I would like to clarify some terms which have to do, which somehow goes a bit. So the first thing is the term of polity. It has very much to do with structures, which means where does the decisions are taken. So very much then parliament, which means brings you back to the question, democracy as a form of rule, the parliament decides. So this is one way decided. The other possibility for a polity is, for example, official organized processes to involve citizens in decision-making, like in city planning, for example, things like that. So then we have the term of policy. It's all about content and guidelines. So the question is more what, which means, for example, there are very often governmental structures, the European Union, etc., publishing white papers, for example, where something is described as a guideline. This is policy, for example, or agreements between parties to form a government. They have like a common understanding in a written way what they want to achieve by government. So this is all about policy. And the third term, which is important, is politics. And this is what we're going to highlight in the next 20 minutes where or 15 minutes where I will talk. It's about the processes, which means how it's organized. This is the question, so therefore, what society connects to each other. So what are the citizens, how they're connected? And therefore the question of how, this is the point which I would like to highlight now in the term. So we're very talking about politics, a bit about policy, a bit about polity, but mainly about politics. So how is it organized? So now, this was now a very theoretical approach of political sciences. So what does it all has to do with youth work? I would like to start with a quote, which I would like to read out. The only true force against the principle of Auschwitz would be autonomy, if I may use the Kantian expression. The power to reflect, to self-determination, to not participate. I'm afraid that even measures that are so wide-ranging will make it difficult to prevent the desk murderers from regrowing. There are people who do it just as servants, perpetuating their own servitude and degrading themselves. But a little can be done through education and enlightenment. Any one of you ever heard this quote so far, or doesn't know where it comes from?
Seems not.
No? Okay. It's a rather old writing. It's about 65 years old. It's made from Adorno. It's a quote from Theodor W. Adorno in his writing Education After Auschwitz, where he was addressing the question, so what we can do, education, after the collapse of civilization, which led to Auschwitz, to the genocide of Jews, to the Holocaust, to the Shoah, what we can do, or what are the conclusions after it? So what does it mean, education after Auschwitz? And here you see this guy, who was a political philosopher in the 50s and 60s, very much stimulating discussions about what to do education after the break of civilization leading to the Shoah. For example, now I would come to a practical level when we look into the German Children and Youth Welfare Act. Probably all in your country. Yeah?
One question before that. As you said that you were going to focus on politics, we had the first question. If you could explain again, polity, yes. And probably polity in the contrast with politics. Just coming back to the slide before.
Okay. So polity are the structures. So where those decisions are taken. For example, in the parliament. Or if there's a process of formally involving citizens in decision making. For example, here in Berlin, where I live, for example, very often when a new neighborhood is built, there's a consultation with inhabitants what is needed, which means there's no formal involvement of citizens in decision making. So this is all the formal structures where decisions are made. But they're mainly made by parliament because we're living in parliamentary democracies where usually people are elected, like delegated, and they're allowed to decide. So this is, I understood, as polity. Is it clear?
Hopefully, yes.
Okay. But I would like to highlight later on very much on the question of politics, how, because this has to do with participation. So how this participation is enabled in the understanding democracy as a way of life. Okay, then we go on. So I don't know we had. So therefore, I would like to go a bit on the legal framework of youth work in Germany, for example. I guess also in your countries you have regulations, laws, acts, and where youth work is regulated. And when we come to the Children and Youth Welfare Act of Germany, which was adopted about 25 years ago, we have in the first paragraph said every young person has a right to promote his or her own development and to be educated as a responsible and sociable personality. So I highlighted here in red what are the key words which I would like to address later on. So the own development of a young person and to be educated to a responsible and sociable personality. And then we're going to chapter 11 of the law. So where it said young people should be provided with youth work service necessary to promote their development, like we had in paragraph 1 already. They should build on the interest of young people and to be co-determined and shaped by them, empowering them to self-determination and encouraging and leading them to societal responsibility and commitment. So the key terms are here now, interest of young people, which means it has to be based on something, so it has to meet the needs of young people and should be shaped and co-determined by them, which means they should be involved in deciding what has to be done in the framework of youth policy for them. And the aim is to empower them to self-determination and encouraging and leading them to a societal responsibility and commitment. And then we come to youth work, which is then described in section 3 of paragraph 11, which means extracurricular youth education, which means non-formal youth education, with general political and other education, which means political education, civic education is on a very high level in the German youth law. And now coming back to what Adorno was saying, he was saying it's important when we discuss what is the goal of education, is the power to reflect, to self-determination, and to not participate. He's saying not to participate because not to participate in something like the Shoah in the Holocaust, which means, of course, he put participation as a positive term, but he said education need to contribute, that people are not blindly following a leader, but being responsible and able to reflect and to self-determinate themselves. And I see this very much in a connection. What is the framework described of youth work, for example, was in Germany, because self-determination is important and they need to be involved in decision-making processes. Okay, so this is about the legal framework. And now I would like to explore a bit what means the political dimension of youth work practically, and I would like also to combine it with some examples in the field I'm active in. When we start educational processes in our center, I guess it's very important to explore the interests of the participants. So therefore, in able to organize an educational process, it always has to be connected with the reality of the people and to make them find out so what they're interested in and what are their interests. So therefore, as I said before, it's very important to run youth work or to run educational processes, to connecting it to the world of participants and their reality, which means it has to be very concrete and it has to be catchy. I was saying before, we are mainly reaching out to neighborhoods which are less privileged in Berlin. I mean, we would like to reach out to all people. We have limited resources. And therefore, we find it very important people who are not living on the sunny side of society, they need to be in the focus of our educational work. And therefore, very often they are apolitical, they are very skeptical about their possibilities to get involved in society. But on the other hand, they're very political because they exactly know what are their interests, what they're standing for. And they know why they're not involved, for example, in society, in participation processes. And therefore, it's very important, I would say, if we want to do youth work, it always has to meet the needs of the people, their reality. So you can't go with an academical discourse into these young people who are 15, 16, 17 years old. It has to be very much connected to their daily life and their own experiences. Because the goal is, after exploring their own interests, and it's connected to the real world, that they have to stand for their own interests, which means they explore their interest and they should be enabled to articulate their interest. And while doing educational processes, they also need to understand, so what are the power relations in society? So why, for example, they might not be heard. So who is more heard in society? And this is then the point what we're trying to explore or discuss with them and to understand that what are the power relations of society. So why, for example, other people are heard more than others? Why does exclusion and stuff like this? So therefore, they also have an understanding, because only if they have an understanding how society is working, they could stand for their own interests and articulate and getting heard. I guess the next point is a very important one, because democracy is based on values, equality, freedom, and stuff like this. But I mean, values are very abstract. And what we would like to try with our educational work is to transform these values into attitudes of the people. So that there must know theoretically, yeah, there's freedom, there's equality, or other values we are standing for, but it has to be transferred into attitudes, which means it very much determined of the way people are acting. So which means, so values turn into attitudes, and these attitudes, which are then inverted into the person, need to be transferred into acting, which means when they stand for their own interests, it is value-based, but it's transferred into attitudes, and this is then shown by acting. And this then is what I was saying before. So values into acting, it means from theory into practice. So they know that what they're standing for, have something like a value in their mind, but this is then through attitudes into practice. And then by articulating and acting, this is for us already political participation. And this has for us very much to do is not just about talking in the seminar about something, but it has to be then reconnected to the real life and also transformed into political participation wherever it's possible, which means they need to be enabled to act. Of course, to act, empowerment is very crucial. We had before the understanding of power relations in society, why they might not have been heard so far. So therefore, empowerment is a big part of our educational work and also afterwards. And it has very much to do in what kind of atmosphere we are educating. I wouldn't say that we are on the same eye level, but of course we are much closer on the same level than it might be in informal educational settings, for example. So therefore, empowerment is very crucial, and this has very much to do with the atmosphere. And then it comes back what I said before, the question of democracy as a way of life. We try to implement it in our seminars, because only if there is a democratic atmosphere in the seminar, we could enable participants to act in democracy. Because I think if they say, no, this is not possible, this is not possible, this is not possible, it's difficult to say, but become active. So there must be spaces to be created. Because I think what is very important when it comes to participation, self-efficacy is quite important. So only when they realize that they can do something, they get empowered, and then they see also afterwards what they could have been changed, or what they have changed. This is then self-efficacy, and I guess this is then very much empowering, which means this all goes in a circle. So, and again, just a quote from the youth work law in Germany, based on the interest of young people, what I said before, so exploring own interest, aiming for self-determination, which means getting self-efficacy, and societal responsibility, like political participation. So this for me are something like the political dimension of youth work, why is it important and how we understand it in our center. Are there any questions on this so far? Because I guess this was quite a lot at the moment.
Not specifically on this topic. We have one question that is going back to Adorno's quote and trying to get more clarification. Maybe we can ask to this anonymous question, which sort of clarification they would be more interested on. Because we can clarify this quote in many different directions.
Yeah. Okay.
Tim, meanwhile, if the person writes, I could ask one question, because
yes, okay.
You use the word of self-determination and reflection in different moments.
Yeah.
Now, when you have explained the different clouds of the political dimension of youth work, it's many things that most youth organizations may be implementing in their local and international work, but they will probably not say that what they are doing is political youth work or political participation. They would just say that it's a part of the learning process, or it's an element for collaboration or something like that.
Okay.
So why would we say that these things specifically are the political dimension?
I guess it has to be very much connected to the question, so what do we understand as political? I was referring earlier to what is democracy as a form of rule or a form of society. And this is more like, I would say, a narrow understanding what is political. But I would very much advertise to have a broader understanding what's political, because I think everything what has to do with how we live together in society, I would say is a political dimension. I know that in a lot of countries, political is a term which is not really welcomed. But I would strongly advise or encourage you to use the term of political more on this, because I think all our way of living together is political. So there's not only a few things which are maybe not political in our daily life. So therefore, I would really advertise a broader understanding of political, and also to use this term to reclaim the term.
Very nice. And then Mila is asking also this question. Apart from self-efficacy, do you think that self-awareness and society awareness also impact how we promote and enhance political participation?
Yeah. Okay, I guess I was already referring to this because I think self-awareness is a very central term. I would say something like exploring own interests. So that I explore myself, what is my role as a young person in this society? So where I identify myself. So where do I stand? What are my interests? How I can get involved? So what are my vision of society? And what kind of society I would like to live in? And I would say everybody has a vision in what kind of society they want to live in. It might be a negative, what they don't want, but at least there's always understanding. And I would say, this is again what Ramon was just asking. This for me is a political dimension. And I guess this is what youth work has to contribute. Because I would say when it comes to civic education, education for democratic citizenship, I would say there's 3 steps. The first step is that we have to transmit knowledge. We have to provide knowledge. And by providing knowledge, I would say something like the second step is enabling judgment on society. So where do I stand? What can I do in society? And what do I like, what I don't like? And I guess in the third step, this is then, I would say, participation. So from transmitting knowledge to enabling judgments, that to get involved and to promote active participation in society. This for me are the 3 steps, what I would say is the dimension of youth work. And this I would describe as political.
And then from the chat, we have another question getting into all these terms. It's coming from Martin, and he's asking, could we use civic and political as terms interchangeable between each other when we are having these conversations?
This is an interesting debate because it's very much because I'm talking now with the background of a German citizen. I would say, I would always say in Germany, we would say it's political education. But I know, for example, in Central Eastern Europe, political education is very much understood differently due to the communist past, for example. So therefore, it's always a question, we're talking now all in English, but we're always having our mother tongue in mind. And I guess, so therefore, it's also a question, so therefore, maybe some people are not using the term political because it's a term which is not very much welcomed in some countries. So therefore, I think we need to clarify. And therefore, I think this idea of civic education is coming originally from the US. So therefore, I like more the term of education for democratic citizenship, human rights education, because it's something describing values, attitudes, what I'm standing for. And this I would then understand as political education. But in Germany, it's summarized also in the law as political education. And this is not a problem to use the term, but I am aware that in some countries, this might be difficult to use this term.
Very nice. And now that we are talking about this and we have put the focus into politics, we have a question from Mark. Polity and structures. Decades ago, it was clear the parliament were supreme. With the growth of multinational corporations, it seems that many crucial decisions affecting our lives are taken outside traditional political structures. So how do we pull back the decision-making power to parliaments? How do we bring back politics to politics, probably?
Yes, so but this is the question, so do we have a rule of law or not in our countries? Because I mean, officially the parliament is, and the government are the mandated bodies to take decisions because they are elected somehow, at least in democracies. The question of multinational companies, of course, they're setting a lot of norms, but there is a question of lobbying and, for example, how independent a parliament or a government can act and is not pressurized by multinational companies. But I guess, therefore, we need, as we believe in democracy, as the best way a state can be governed. It's a question so that also the mandated bodies can really take the decision. But this is a big question, so how to draw back the influence of multinational companies. But I guess this was not just an actual debate, it's a debate for many years already. So, and I don't really have an answer, but I think, of course, multinational companies very much determine the daily life. But I guess, so therefore, the decisions need to be taken by the mandated bodies. But maybe other people have an idea how to draw back this development.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think we can continue with the presentation.
Okay. I'm also coming more or less to an end already, and then we can discuss it more further. So I would like to conclude. So what is needed? I already highlighted some points, which I would like to summarize a bit. So when it comes to youth work and the political dimension, I think it's very important understanding democracy as lifestyle. And really, I would say democratic culture, strengthen democratic cultures, the way how people enact with each other in society. This is really the core issue. Therefore, also, I would like to advertise a very broad understanding what is political. As I said before, just in my last remark, I think how people interact in society, this is already on a political level. Politics is not just this, what is happening in government and in ministries and stuff like this. It has to do on a daily basis. So how do I interact with other people? This for me already is political. The next point is clarifying terms. So we're talking here about participation. This is also the topic of the symposium, which is going to take place soon. So, but in Germany, for example, we have different terms. We have Beteiligung, Mitbestimmung, Teilhabe, so 3 terms. If I look to the dictionary, they're all translated into participation. So what is participation? What is co-determination? So where people can really decide something. And what maybe is just involvement. And therefore, I would like to ask you also to look into your language, what terms you are using. Because not everything what is participation is participation. Probably you're all aware about this model of letter of young people's participation society. I don't want to go into deep into it, but there's this 8 rungs on the ladder. What is all participation? But the question, what is real participation and what is just, decoration, I would say. So therefore, keep this in mind when we're talking about participation, because I think participation has to me very much to do with self-efficacy, which I said. So there's own places, own resources, which can be created. So participation is then successful if there's free spaces to create, exist, which means not everything is determined. When, for example, there's a new playground to be built in the neighborhood, let the kids and youngsters decide what is their playground, not somebody in the city administration. And because then kids and youngsters decide, the playground could be like this and this. And then it's built in the way the kids said it. And then they see the playground afterwards being built. This is self-efficacy. And I guess this is then stimulating also active participation in society. Because I think nothing would be more disturbing if the kids say, I want a playground like this and this. And then the mayor saying, yes, very nice for you, thank you for your contribution, but we decided to build a playground in this and that. This is not participation, and this is frustrating, and this leads then also to apathy of young people, I would say. But just take now the playground example as an example for any other participation processes in society. Okay, thank you for listening. And now the floor is yours. I'm looking forward to discuss a bit more in depth. And hopefully maybe there's some questions which I can answer, but I also would like to see how you, for example, in your country understand participation, democracy, or maybe you even disagree with me, it's also fine, because I think democracy is all about discussing and arguing a bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. We have a question from Martin that is very much connected with the last things that you wrote. And I don't know if we could let Martin introduce the question by himself. So I think, Martin, would you like to share with us?
I enabled Martin's audio, so actually he can talk if he wants.
Oh, no microphone with us then. Okay, then I will read it as it is right now. So, following on the slide, are there any value criteria for the German youth work? Because we are seeing extremism and illiberal parties doing more of the same with their own visions of future, which they would claim as legitimate.
Okay.
And he's saying that we can think about the example of Hungary, for example. So I'm not
Yes,
sure if we're talking about value education inside youth work.
I guess this is an interesting question what Martin is asking, because I also have my concerns a bit when we see the development in some European countries at the moment with a growing influence of right-wing parties even taking over the government, for example. Maybe we are in Germany a bit like, because this whole funding of youth work in Germany is very much away from political party domination. So we have a variety of actors from the left to the right. And for example, a change of government in Germany doesn't necessarily have a big impact on how youth work is financed, because there's more like a consensus that we have something like a variety of offers and people can choose from what they would like to see. For example, I was talking about my education center, which is a left-wing youth education center. We're having in total 7 education centers of youth organization in Berlin, and where the schools, for example, can choose from. There are the Scouts, there's a Protestant church, there's a Catholic church, there's sport, and so on. And there's Falcon and there's trade union, which means, so we offer all together as an umbrella our seminars to schools, and they can choose from it. So therefore, but of course, it's not to do about brainwashing in our center, but it's just to give an impetus to strengthen democratic citizenship in Germany. And I guess, for example, but to receive state funding, it's important that you agree on the values described in our constitutions, like the human rights. The first 20 chapters of our constitutions are the basic rights, which are mainly reflecting the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which means everybody who wants to receive state funding has to promote these values. But this is even between the democratic sector from the left to the right is completely agreeing. Everybody's agreeing on. And now the question is, for example, we have in the state of Brandenburg around Berlin, we have elections in 10 days. At the moment, the right-wing populist is the strongest in the opinion polls. So we will see if they come to government. What does it mean, for example? But we have the examples of Poland or Hungary or even Italy, where right-wing populist groups were forming the government. So therefore, but everybody who believes in the democratic consensus of values is entitled to it, and then people can choose from it what they would like to see. And maybe it's also very good for their making up their own position. This is why we're reaching out to such young people from 8 to 14 years old, where they're starting to form their own identity, asking themselves questions, and then we try to give them orientation.
Okay.
I don't know if it answers Martin's question.
I hope so too. For me, it was a nice answer. We have 10 more minutes, but it seems that okay, we have a new anonymous question. With the sensitive political situation in the Middle East, do you have any recommendation for youth to participate politically?
I mean, the problem with the Middle East, I would say, is looking to Palestine, but also looking to Israel, that the democratic culture is rather weak or became weaker, I would say. So the question is very much dominated by political blocs. And I also would go so far that a lot of the political blocs are not really ideology based, they are mainly based on personalities. The same we have in a lot of countries in Central Eastern Europe, but also more and more in Western Europe. So therefore it's very difficult. And so the question, due to this political blocs, which are more oriented on personalities and less on political profiles, I would say it's not very clear what people are standing for. And this is then difficult for democratic culture because there's not really a contest of the best political ideas. It's more the question about the contest about who's maybe the most charismatic persons. But you never know what you're going to buy when you vote for a person. And this is maybe the question, what makes it difficult to get involved. And this is, of course, not very inviting to young people who have their own idea to get active in society. I would say this is then a difficult issue, not just in the Middle East, but also I would say it refers also to Europe as well. But I guess so therefore I think youth work is so important, and to enable that these courses and to enable also to show areas where participation could be possible. And this starts in the neighborhood you're living in and goes until the national or even the European level or the other regional level.
It seems that when the time is getting close to the end, people start realizing that they have many questions and they start bumping to us. So from Laura, we have this question. When you are teaching young children about political participation, which scenarios do you use which they can relate to? And then we have a question from Mark. If you could also give us some example about some direct results about political participation that are a follow-up of one of your seminars.
Okay, so on the question of Laura, for example, I might like to start. As I was saying before, the starting point of our educational processes is always the own environment. So when we talk about discrimination, about racism or whatever, so we're not talking about big series, what is racism? So we try to connect it to the daily experience of young people. For example, if we talk about discrimination, the seminar would never be called, let's do a training against discrimination. It's always called about democracy or something positive. So I would always to highlight something positive. And then we would like to explore or to analyze a bit their daily life. And by this, then we're trying to develop concrete ideas, what they would like to see, for example. Like I gave the example of a playground, which maybe is more for the up to 10 years old people. But for example, they say there is nothing in our neighborhood where we could spend our free time besides a shopping center, for example. Which means, for example, they were demanding there need to be a youth center or there need to be social workers, for example. And based on the concrete demands they develop in the seminar, we are trying to show up where or how to realize this idea. Of course, it's a big fight. But for example, if they say there is too much racism in our neighborhood, there's too much influence of right-wing forces on our neighborhood, for example, that they are painting posters which they put up in the neighborhood. So therefore, we are not saying what is the political action, because the political action need to be decided by the participants. Because if we say do a demonstration, but they say we don't want to do a demonstration, we can't push them to do a demonstration, which means also the way to express their demands need to be connected to the daily life, to the surroundings they're living in. For example, we did once, for example, they painted posters, for example, and we printed them later on postcards for them, which they could distribute in the neighborhood or posters, for example. So we try to show them up where they could actively participate, but we don't tell them how to participate, in example. Another example, maybe to answer the other question, is we're working a lot with class speakers or school students representative in the decision-making bodies of school, for example, where we train them very much on their rights and their possibilities they have inside school in co-decision-making. And there we always do a future laboratory where they develop, for example, their own ideal neighborhood or school. And from this we develop concrete demands, which then later on implement in small projects. So we very much providing a tool where they can explore concrete activities. The problem is we only have a 5-day seminar, and it's always a question of follow-up, where we then link up with social workers in the neighborhood, for example, to follow up the processes after the seminar that they really get implemented.
Thank you very much. Tim, we introduced you talking that you are also doing this youth work against discrimination, right-wing extremism and populism. And there is this question talking about how we tend to talk about controlling right-wing, but we don't talk so much about the left-wing extremism and left-wing populism. So do you think similar measures need to be taken on the other side of the political spectrum? Why do we say right wing and we don't say in general extremism and populism?
I would say left-wing extremism is something different than right-wing extremism, because we have a big debate in Germany, what is left-wing extremism? At the moment in Germany, the debate is not anymore, we're not using the term of extremism anymore for left-wing extremism. It's more the question, so how to approach these people, because it's something like left militant attitudes, because I think right-wing extremism is something which very much direct against a single person, because due to their background, I would say. And leftish extremism is something against the state, but not very often against a concrete idea or a concrete person, I would say. It's more something like against something like structures, I would say. And so therefore, I think the way to educate against right-wing extremism is different than to counter radical leftish idea. And I would say, but still the same is something that what I would say is promoting values of democracy, like freedom of speech. Of course, freedom of speech also has boundaries, I would say, but therefore I would say to tackle the question of leftish radical ideas, it has to be different than right-wing extremism. The same goes also for radical Muslim approaches, I would say. But there's a big debate in Germany about it, how to counter different appearances of, but I wouldn't say left and right-wing extremism is the same, because it's also sociology is very different, I would say, and therefore different measures need to be taken to address the challenge.
Thank you very much, Tim. We're getting close to the hour, so I think this is a good moment to close, even if we have some questions left. I would like to share that first, when we were talking about this political youth work conversation, I had this thought that we can say that youth work is political because everything is political. It's an approach that is easy to reach. But with the points that I have heard here, I have seen more specific elements, and I get words like self-efficacy or emancipation as elements of youth work education. Also, I think this creation and support of democratic and participatory spaces is another element that I have seen as key in why youth work is political. So personally, I'm very happy that I have attended this conversation, and I hope that it was also a good conversation for all of you. Thank you, everybody, for this nice talk. It has been very beautiful and insightful conversation. For these unanswered questions, don't worry, because we will bring most of them also to the symposium and continue working on the different elements of them. And just to close, I would like to share also that Many Whys comes back on 5th of September. There will be another online conversation like this one. This time it will be putting in contrast traditional and more unconventional forms of participation, of political participation. We will have two speakers that will talk from two different perspectives, and that way we will be able to see and compare which are the added values and positive elements of these different forms of participation. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Lemonas. And hope to see you on the 5th of September.